Hi, this is Maria Moldar, and you're listening to Icon Fetch.
Welcome to Icon Fetch, the web's premier music interview show. Now, here's your host, Tony Peters.
Set to go on another interview coming your way, and our guest this time, B.J. Thomas, is a 5-time Grammy Award winner that sold over 70 million records worldwide. His hits endure to this day. Songs like Hooked on a Feeling, I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, another Somebody Done Somebody Wrong song, and Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head.
Raindrops are falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed.
He remains active, still recording and playing shows to this day. So it's our pleasure to welcome to the show, B.J. Thomas. How are you, man?
Thank you, man. I'm well. Thanks for talking to me.
Hey, it's great. It's great to talk to you. Now, you know, one of the things I had a chance to listen to a lot of your music, over the last few days preparing for the interview, and it's interesting. I mean, some of your stuff is classified as, pop, some of it's country, some of it's gospel. Do you think too hard about all these classifications, or you just kind of go with it through the years?
Well, I don't really pay any attention to it. I'm just so used to doing whatever I think is a good song or whatever I can connect to in a personal manner. But the music to me is more emotional than anything else. So if I can really believe what I'm doing, that makes all the difference for me. But I started of course, as a young kid of 16 when we got our band together, and we were all 16, about 4 or 5 of us. And that was right at during the time when Top 40 radio was just being created. I think, there were only 3 Top 40 stations, one in Dallas and 2 in Houston, and where I grew up in Houston. And so we would just take that playlist and learn the songs we liked off that Top 40 chart. And so I've just always been used to doing, I never thought about genres. I just did the songs that I felt good that I wanted to sing.
Right. And what's interesting is, you talk about your roots, you've always had a real soulful quality to your singing, and you were influenced by a lot of those soul guys in the early days, right?
I was a huge fan. Of course, there was Elvis when I was, 12 or 13 or so, but I was a huge fan of Bobby Bland and Ray Charles and Little Junior Parker and these guys, and I got to see them quite often in the Houston area, and I loved Bobby Bland, and there's a lot of my style that it was influenced by Mr. Bland. He was a great guy, and I somehow. We met each other when I was just a young guy, 13 to 14 years old, and he was really great to me, and so I always admired him, and I loved that R&B music. And it really, when I had I'm So Lonesome, the first gig they booked me out on, the first gig I had that was out of state or whatever, was with James Brown, because they thought I was an R&B artist.
Wow.
And, for that time, it was more of an R&B sound than now they consider it country, but they try to label everything now. But so I went out and worked with James Brown, and went up and worked with Jackie Wilson, and they considered me an R&B artist for at the first hit.
Well, tell me this. So you worked with James Brown a little bit. Did you get a chance to see, because he's known as the hardest working man in show business? Did you get to see some of that firsthand?
Oh, absolutely. I studied him like he was a school book, and he was a wonderful guy. For some reason, we just I don't know exactly how it happened, but he really liked me. And at this first sound check, of course, he was there at sound check, kind of checking us out, and we hit it off really well, or at least he took it upon himself to take care of me and to make sure that he could tell that we were amateurs, and we were just starting, and he took the time and the concern to kind of help me out and help me do the right thing, and I always remember that and admired that, and I always had a great respect for him. He was like a godlike figure, and he was one of the top entertainers and performers of all time.
Yeah, one irreplaceable guy for sure. So.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's go back here for a minute with your first hit, "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry."
I'm so lonesome I could cry.
What's interesting is I've talked to a lot of artists where a big hit kind of comes by accident or like as an afterthought, and that was kind of the case with this, right?
Yeah, it was total accident. I've actually did the song for my dad, and I had my buddy and I had gone to the movies and saw the Your Cheating Heart, which was the first movie about Hank Williams and his life, and I'm So Lonesome was in the movie. And my buddy said, you ought to start singing that song. It'd be perfect for you and the band. And so I started doing it with the Triumphs was the name of my band back then. And it wasn't my band; it was our band. But I started doing it. Our dances, we just played these big dances out in the boondocks. We were too young to. That's about all we had. And it kind of developed into the version I did, and I put it. We got the chance to make our first album, and I cut the song, and we put it on the B-side of what we thought was a hit, and somehow it found its way onto the radio, went number one in Houston in 3 weeks, and kicked me off because we had no idea what a hit record was, and so it did. It just came as an accident, and sometimes that's how the best songs happen. You're not doing them with any real purpose. You're just doing the song because you love it and trying to sing it the best you can. So it worked out wonderfully.
It did. And what's interesting, you were signed to a little record label in Houston called Pacemaker Records.
Yeah.
and so you're on this, and suddenly you've got a hit that's becoming larger than just Houston, and so then how do you go from being on this little label in Houston to a legendary label like Scepter Records? I mean, they had the Shirelles and Chuck Jackson and Dionne Warwick and all this. So
yeah, I mean, they had Twist and Shout, Louie. They had Dionne Warwick with all those major, beautiful classic records. Well, as it turns out, I grew up with a guy in Houston, a guy by the name of Steve Tyrell, and we were just like brothers. And when he was just a young guy, I think he was 18 or so, he somehow got a job with Scepter Records because he was very instrumental in breaking Dionne Warwick's first record, which broke in Houston. And they flew him to New York for the World Series. And anyway, make a long story short, they gave him a job as a promotion man. And when he got back to Houston, he told me, he said, "Look, man, as soon as you have a song that was a hit record," he said, "I'm going to get Scepter to pick your record up." And so when Lonesome went number one in a couple of weeks there, he used his influence with the Scepter, and they released my record, and that's how I got on Scepter. And I always loved being on that label. They weren't they weren't the best people with how do you put this, with money,
right?
Because back in that day,
right.
The industry practice was they only paid if they had to,
right?
But,
yeah.
But they had a lot of hit records and a lot of talent there, and of course, Mr. Bacharach, Burt Bacharach owned half of the label. It was Scepter Wand, and so they had a beautiful arrangement there and a lot of success.
Right. Now, what was interesting, I love looking into some of these Billboard books through the years, and I found this interesting that not only I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, but also several of your other early singles on Scepter were all songs that you recorded during the Pacemaker time.
Yeah, well, a lot of the first records, of course, were off that first. That Pacemaker thing was we finally had the chance to make an album, and so that's where Lonesome came off that album. So there were a number of other songs on
like
there.
Mama was on there,
Sue, and Plain Jane and various other songs which we ran through.
Right. Nice. Now, so after that happened, how do you go from being in Houston to then recording in Memphis for one of the at the time just fantastic studios there, American? So.
Well, I started working in a national arena, and we started with James, and then of course I ended up with Dick Clark, and then I started doing one-nighters across the country. And in '67, I had the big year. I had the 3 hit records in '66, and things were great. In '67, I was kind of just sitting there, not really doing anything in Houston, and thinking, well, I need to record, I need to get back in, and my buddy Mark James, the songwriter, who wrote "Hooked on a Feeling," "Suspicious Minds," and wrote "Eyes of a New York Woman" for me. He called me and said, "Hey, I'm up in Memphis," and he said, "You need to come up here because these guys are cutting a lot of hit records and got a lot of writers, and you should come up." So my brother and I we moved up to Memphis, and I went in saw the guys at the studio, Chip Moman and the American Studio Group, and he said, well, let's try you. So I went in the studio. It wasn't really recording, and we just did a song, and it was like they had always been my band, and I was there, always been their singer. It just was a perfect fit, and so we immediately started recording. And Chips told me, hey, if you move up here permanently, he said, we'll get a hit on you much quicker. One will come in, and I can call you, and you can run down here, and we can cut it. And that's kind of what happened.
Wow.
Mark James started definitely writing for me, and we would sit down and have these big discussions, and then he would write songs about what we had been talking about. And he wrote "The Eyes of a New York Woman," and then he wrote "Hooked on a Feeling," and I was just in the right place at a very good time.
Right. Now, so let's talk about the first one there, "Eyes of a New York Woman." That was like your first hit in Memphis kind of thing. So is there anything you can tell me about that? Did that come up from a discussion?
Yeah, we had their band had been very successful, and they had flown the band and some of the writers that Scepter had up to New York, and they had let them. They had a tour up there, and I think they had a couple of sessions up there. And when Mark came back, he just had that idea, "The Eyes of a New York Woman." He wrote it for me. And so he took me, we were at the studio, and he said, look, let me play this song for you. And he played it down, and I said, man, I love that. And it was kind of different for me because everybody was trying to record a ballad on me then. How that goes. Everybody wanted to record another "I'm So Lonesome" on me. And so he just saw me in a different light. He said, this is kind of a different little direction for you to go. And so we cut that, and then we used the sitar the electric sitar sparingly on that because the Beatles were using it extensively, and the Gamble and Huff were doing the sitar out of Philadelphia, and so we kind of picked that up and started using it. Chips did, the Chips Moman, our producer, and then the next song Mark wrote for me was "Hooked on a Feeling," and we really, Reggie Young played that classic guitar ride in "Hooked on a Feeling" and just kept rolling.
And that's one of those songs that just continues on. You had a big hit with it, and then Blue Swede has a hit with it, and then that ends up. I mean, you can play that for any 8-year-old in the country, and they know it from the Guardians of the Galaxy movie.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, it's funny, because back at the start of my career, there was a guy named I won't name anybody, but there was a guy from England who would cover my records. He covered Mama and Billy and Sue, and he would record my records over there. And as it turns out, the guy that produced that particular artist was the guy that put that Blue Swede "Hooked on a Feeling" together. They took a little piece of "Running Bear," was an old country song from the early '60s, the Ooga Chugga, and
right.
put it with my song. And so that particular guy covered my music and kind of preyed on my stuff for a while, but that's kind of where that came from. But it's a great song.
Right.
And Mark had a way of writing things that would really touch, kind of ring your bell, and be very, very simply put. So, a great song. I love that song. It's one of my favorites.
Right, absolutely. And then you're working at Scepter, and Dion is working with Hal David and Burt Bacharach. And so, I mean, was that kind of the connection that got you hooked up with them?
Yeah. The lady that owns Scepter, and of course, and Steve and all the people. Just when I first got with the label, they just saw it would just be such a natural, perfect thing for me to start recording with Mr. Bacharach. So they started trying to get Burt to write me something, and they, Gloria and I had just gotten married in '68, and and the label asked me if we would move up to New York. And they kind of the same Chips thing about moving to Memphis. They said, I said, hey, if you move up to New York, we think we can put you with Mr. Bacharach, and that'll happen quicker, if you're here. So Gloria and I moved to New York, and I did fairly quickly start rehearsing and going through some music with Bert. And then when they wrote Raindrops, I was just kind of the natural pick there. And so that's how that came about.
Raindrops are falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed, nothing seems to fit. Those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling.
Of course, I asked Bacharach if I could bring some of my own style to it, and he told me, if there was room after I sang it as he composed it, if there was room to do so. And I always, I didn't record anything that I didn't feel like I brought something to the composition, melody-wise. I mean, I would never just do it note for note as somebody wrote it. I always felt like, or was motivated to put some of my own personality into it. And of course, I did with Raindrops, but the composition was beautiful. I loved the song, and when I did the me on the end, it was only on one take. We only recorded it 3 times, and the third time I kind of thought, well, what the hey, I'm gonna stick one of my licks in here and kind of do what I feel. And I didn't know I was going to do it, and I did it. And as it turned out, Bert really liked it.
Nothing's worrying me.
I loved the material. I always loved that song. It kind of had a disappointing start. It got bad reviews. Radio stations wouldn't play it. They said, "Oh, that's BJ's singing the wrong note," and that kind of quirky melody that he wrote. People were, they weren't going for it right at first. But when the movie was such a big hit, and that was, Butch Cassidy was such a great movie, and it just was swept the nation. And so they went on the record, and it turned into a great success, and then one of the classic songs. I think it just went in the Grammy Hall of Fame. Bert and Hal and I. It's gotten its respect over the years, and we did the soundtrack to the bicycle scene. And the whole thing about, hey, he was Butch was being chased. He was an outlaw, but at the moment, he was riding a bicycle with a pretty girl, and he was free, and it was a beautiful kind of concept, and a kind of an unusual way of putting a song in a movie, which they were really famous for, Bert and Hal. So it was written for the movie, and we re-recorded the song about 6 weeks later, and did the full orchestra version that was the hit record.
Right, yeah. And so this song goes on to become, you win an Academy Award with it, you win a Grammy with it, and I understand I saw another interview where you talked about how crazy it was to be at this Academy Award ceremony because you're hanging out with, like Dennis Hopper, and I thought you said at one point you met John Wayne or something like that.
I didn't meet him, but I went. They had to go a big dinner cocktail thing, and after the show, and we walked around and looked at all the people, and of course we went over and looked at John Wayne, and he was quite the figure. I had a big production number on the Academy Award show, and I didn't win the Academy Award. That was Mr. Bacharach won for the song and the score, and he and Hal won for the song.
Right,
so he won 2, and Hal won 1. And I had this big production number on the show, and I just after I did the first rehearsal, I thought, you know what, they wouldn't have this big production thing. And I think unless this song was going to win, I just felt like, I think he's going to win, and as it turns out, he did. And it was quite a wonderful night. It was the biggest audience that the Academy show had up to that point, and a lot of great people were on it. John Wayne won his Academy Award that night, and just an unbelievable evening, great memory for me.
And this, a big number one hit for you and everything. Do you find, after that happens, that it's just kind of a whirlwind at that point? Do you have fond memories of it, or does things kind of hit the fast forward button at that point? Because then everybody, wants to get a hold of you, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I had all these people. I'll just keep it personal. I also was a person. I had a life, and there was drama in my life. I was just a human being trying to live my life, and so here this thing comes, this big music, and that's what I'm wanting and looking for. But you're never really prepared to handle it when you have something that's so big like Raindrops was, and I'd already had 4 million sellers before then, and I thought I was pretty much rocking, but it did take me to another level, and it was hard to, it took a while, along with my personal problems, just from my generation. I had some personal problems that would inhibit my success sometimes. So to kind of get a hold of that, of the stature then that I had after that song, took a while, but I think that's the challenge that a lot of artists have, and I'm glad I got through it.
Sure, absolutely, and I think that it probably, you can breathe a sigh of relief when you went back in the studio and did I Just Can't Help Believin'.
I just can't help believing when she smiles up soft and gentle, with a trace of misty morning and a promise of tomorrow in her eyes.
I mean, that put you back on the charts there.
Yeah, I went to, of course I recorded a song called Everybody's Out of Town with Backrack and David after Raindrops, and it was a kind of a top 20 thing here, but it was a national number one song in Australia, and was very successful around the world. And then I went back into Nashville and cut I Just Can't Help Believin'. I mean, not Nashville, but Memphis, and cut Just Can't Help Believin'. And then I went down to Atlanta and recorded some things with Buddy Bowie, produced by Steve Tyrell and Buddy Bowie, Most of All and No Love at All, Mighty Clouds of Joy, and some of those things. So I got back rolling. And, I was a little more comfortable. It was like when they asked us to move to New York, it was like, man, I don't know if I really want to, because I'm cutting hit records in Memphis, and it feels good. I love all the guys. It's, Elvis lives there, and, the whole thing was beautiful. So when I went to the New York thing, I loved New York. I loved that whole experience, but it wasn't just something that was that natural to me. I was a little, it wasn't that I was, the water was over my head, or I was out of my groove, but there was a little different thing about New York. The songs were a little different. They were more kind of Billy Joel kind of things, as it turned out, and that just wasn't quite my groove. So once I went back to Memphis and did Believin' and got back into that, I felt better as an artist.
Absolutely. You got to find your sweet spot, and that Memphis was where that was. So, you worked with Barry Mann and Cynthia Whale on a couple of songs. You talked about Believin'. I want to ask you about Rock and Roll Lullaby.
Sing it sweet and clear, oh mama, let me hear that old rock and roll lullaby.
Because what's cool about that is that you got Dwayne Eddy on that, you got members of the Blossoms on that. I mean, that's a cool track. What can you tell me about that one?
Yeah, that's Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil. They were, they are one of the greatest writing teams of all time. Of course, they're husband and wife, and they started, at the Brill Building, and they were great. Wrote some wonderful things, and we cut an album called Billy Joe Thomas at the Electric Lady in New York, and they had written some songs that they wanted to turn into a Broadway play. It was about a guy named Rhodes, and Rock and Roll Lullaby was a part of that play, and their play didn't come about. It didn't, it failed to get staged and everything. And we were good friends with them, and so they gave me a few songs for the album, Roads and Sweet Cherry Wine and Rock and Roll Lullaby. And really, I think Rock and Roll Lullaby is one of the best produced, best sounding records I ever did, and I still do it, and I love it.
And it's got a great Beach Boys kind of feel to it, and I mean, you influenced by them, I imagine, because you did "Don't Worry, Baby" as another hit of yours too.
Well, yeah, I always loved the Beach Boys. I think Rock and Roll Lullaby, I don't think was really a Beach Boys song, but we got Brian Wilson on the phone and asked him if the Beach Boys would sing backup, do vocals on it, and we did actually. He did agree to do that, and we flew to California, and for that album, I did a session with John Sebastian and Carole King for that album, and we never could connect, of course, with Brian again. He was in his reclusive stage, so we did hook up with some guys who had worked on the Jan and Dean records, and they sounded just like the Beach Boys, and so they did that beautiful Beach Boy thing on that song. And Dwayne Eddy was, what an experience that was, what a great guy he is, and just one of the greatest experiences I've had in the studio. Of course, Darlene Love sang back up with the Blossoms and the Fonz, and just a great, very well produced song.
Yep, absolutely. I want to ask you about one more, another big hit for you, and I think they call it the song with the longest title of a number one hit. Hey, won't you play another Somebody Done Somebody Wrong song?
Hey, won't you play another Somebody Done Somebody Wrong song?
I noticed on the songwriting credits that you've got Larry Butler. Now, Larry, man, he wrote songs for everybody.
Yeah, well, he wrote that with Chips Moman, and of course, Chips was a great writer and wrote a lot of hit records. And he and Larry had just written that song, and I had come down. The Chips and the guys from Memphis had moved to Nashville, and opened a studio there. And so I came down and we recorded an album. It was kind of at the end of the album with Chips. We sat at the control booth there and played the entire album back, and we both kind of agreed that we weren't really sure that there was a hit record on the album. And so one of the guys suggested, "Hey, Chips, why don't you play BJ that song that you and Larry just wrote?" And so anyway, that came about where it was kind of I don't know why he hadn't played it for me. I'm not sure it was even really finished. It was kind of they had just written it the day or two before we recorded. And he played it down, and it was one of those things like Raindrops. I mean, Raindrops to me was obviously a great song. It was going to be a big record, and that's the way I felt about Wrong Song. A lot of times you're not really sure. You hope it's going to be successful, but when he played Wrong Song, I thought, man, this is going to be a great record. And as it turned out, it was a number one country, number one pop. Number one easy listen. It was just one of those great songs.
Right, absolutely.
I was lucky to get it. I've been very fortunate in my career to work with some of the great writers and composers of my time, and very fortunate there.
If we flash forward a little bit, I understand you put out a record not too long ago, the Living Room Sessions, and this is interesting because you kind of, I don't know, like reimagine some of the songs a little bit, give them a little bit different arrangements, mostly acoustic kind of thing. How did that come about?
Yeah, it was just a totally acoustic album. We kind of course, we did it for fun, and of course, we wanted it to be, successful, and it has been fairly successful album. A lot of fun to do. Did a lot of duets on it with Vince Gill and various other Lyle Lovett and various people. Sarah Nimitz. It was a lot of fun to do, and just a laid-back kind of thing. We respected the original recordings. We didn't change anything up too drastically, but it was just more of a laid-back thing. A lot of fun to do.
Right, absolutely. Now, I understand, you've got a website. Your website looks real good. That's bjthomas.com, right?
Yeah, bjthomas.com, and all that information will be on there. Our schedule, our road schedule, and I'm still out there. I'll probably do 60 shows this year, and I still love to, perform, and I've got a great band, and we go out there and have fun. Absolutely. Well, BJ, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and good luck. And like I say, we hope to see you on the road then too. All right? Man, I really enjoyed this. Appreciate talking to you. I understand you got a great. I can tell you've got a great broadcast and a great show here, and I'm glad to be part of it. And thank you very much, my man.
Yeah, it's legendary artist B.J. Thomas, and he's got some great stories to tell for sure. So if you missed any part of the interview, you can hear it again by going to our website. It's iconfetch.com. Shows are also available for free download at the iTunes store as well. And thanks to you, the listener, taking the time to check these out every week. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Icon Fetch with Tony Peters. Want more great interviews? Head over to iconfetch.com. There, you'll find every interview we've ever done, plus CD reviews, This Day in Music, and a random album of the day. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Who is Tony going to interview next? It could be you. Send what you've got to Tony Peters. Icon Fetch, P.O. Box 292134, Dayton, Ohio 45429. Or email Tony at host@iconfetch.com. Until next time, this is Joe Kelly. Have a great day.